Today I will be covering crisis counseling on a college campus and how it can be tailored to an institution's population and specific needs. During this presentation, I will cover the different sources of trauma that students can encounter, both individually and as a student body. Next, I will cover the issues that I feel students on St. Bonaventure's campus specifically face. After, I will talk about how campuses can respond to various forms of trauma, and finally I'll focus in on how St. Bonaventure's campus leaders can offer help to its students following a crisis. On a college campus, there are chances for students to experience trauma individually. Coming into college, it is unclear to the institution, and sometimes even the student themselves, if a student has experienced trauma prior to them moving on to campus. Students could have experienced a myriad of traumatic events before starting their college careers, and the stress from these events is not likely to evaporate as soon as the student leaves that stressful environment and starts classes. If a student experienced trauma in the past, such as parents getting divorced, loss of a family member, socioeconomic stress, anything really, they certainly could bring that stress with them and thus displayed behaviors of post-traumatic stress, socially and/or academically. This could include behaviors and reactions such as anxiety and depression, interpersonal issues, and dangerous forms of self-harm. Part of this could also be ongoing family stress. Just because students have moved away from home to go to school does not mean that they cannot be affected by stress from home. Whether there are ongoing family issues, a loved one or family pet passes away, or if their relationships with family members become strained with the distance, stress from family can follow students when they go to college. Another major source of trauma on the individual level for students is sexual assault. According to RAINN, or the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, among undergraduate students, 23.1% of females and 5.4% of males experience rape or sexual assault through physical force, violence, or incapacitation while they are in college. Of these female victims, only 20% report their assault to law enforcement, hinting that the percentage of victims may be much higher. With these high percentages of students who are assaulted, and the many who choose not to report their assault, college campuses face the issue of trying to help victims who may not even want to come forward and talk about what they have experienced. Students as a community can also experience large-scale traumas together. One, which has unfortunately become more prevalent, is mass interpersonal violence. This includes purposeful violence not related to war that results in a high amount of injuries and deaths. This could include school shootings, something that has been on the rise on college campuses. According to Everytown, an independent research organization that has been compiling statistics on school and higher education shootings since the Sandy Hook shooting, between 2013 and 2015, there were 76 shootings on college campuses. Not all of these shootings resulted in deaths, but the fact alone that these shootings happened could definitely impact students on those campuses and their sense of safety moving forward. Natural disaster is another traumatic event that a campus community could face together. These large-scale environmental events can cause injury, death, and loss of property, and can leave those affected to feel a sense of fear for a long time after the effects of the storm or other natural event are over. Finally, witnessing or learning about the death of someone else can affect a campus community, no matter if the person who has passed is a friend or merely an acquaintance. The likelihood of the death of another student or faculty member affecting the rest of the campus community is high, especially when the campus is a close-knit community. And if the death was through murder or suicide, those left behind may feel more intense grief and possibly anger for not being able to help that person. At Bonas, there are some specific factors that I think raise some potential treatment issues. Given its small population, there is a tendency for information to travel quickly on campus. This could be detrimental to the treatment process following a traumatic event on campus, given that incorrect information could get spread amongst the students and staff and thus cause more psychological damage. Due to its small size, many students and staff know each other or know of each other, and thus form close bonds. This factor could both help in the treatment process, as students and staff might be more willing to support each other because they already feel connected in the same community. On the other hand, this close-knit community may hurt more students and staff initially, because more people are likely to know others associated with the trauma. If, for instance, someone in the campus community passes away, more students and staff are likely to have had a connection to that person. Finally, SBU's limited resources on campus and the surrounding area may make it difficult to respond to trauma in terms of numbers. While there are counseling staff members on campus and some individual counselors and community agencies in the area, the amount of staff needed to service all roughly 2,000 students might slow down treatment. When first responding to a crisis that has affected the entire campus, I think it would be best for the school's leaders to first share all known and true information regarding the traumatic event. Whether it be the death of a student, a shooting on campus, or the public report of a sexual assault, or multiple on a campus, I think making all information regarding the incident available to the students could cut back on the spreading of rumors and false information. This would allow counselors and other responders to the incident to focus on caring for the students rather than having to explain the incident to a student. Assuring students' safety is also key to treatment, as feeling safe on campus and when talking to a counselor can speed up a student's ability to embrace treatment and moving on from the trauma. As part of this, I think it would be appropriate for the school to immediately make it known what services are available to students if they need help, whether it is posting the hours of the campus counseling center or holding a school-wide meeting to allow students to come together as a community. Reaching out to all of the students at once could foster a sense of community that students will need following a traumatic event. Next, assessment on the individual level is key in determining the emotional needs of students following the event. To start off with, as a form of triaging the amount of care a student might need moving forward after a traumatic event, a structured interview-based assessment might be best. This would allow for a practitioner to quickly assess a student's level of distress and to determine if they needed further care. The Trauma Symptom Inventory 2, created by Briere in 2011, could be appropriate as an initial assessment for college students, as it is age-appropriate for assessing 18 to 21-year-olds, and it covers many symptoms of post-traumatic stress. This could give a counselor a quick indication of the issues a student is dealing with currently. The PTSD Symptom Scale, or the PSS, would also be helpful in this kind of scenario in order to establish a baseline with a student. If the counselor determined that a student needed longer-term counseling, getting to know the student's history with trauma would be a good starting point, as it might let the counselor know if a student has experienced similar traumas before. I believe the initial trauma review for adolescents could be helpful in this case, as it can be used with clients up to age 21, and it includes a comprehensive list of possible traumas that a student might have experienced in their life leading up to that assessment. The life events checklist would also be suitable, as it asks the user to think about whether in the course of their life they have seen or experienced a trauma for themselves. This kind of assessment would be useful in a scenario where the counselor is just meeting a client for the first time and was not sure what kind of trauma the client had experienced before. This assessment is also appropriate for a broader range of ages, so it might be useful with students who are non-traditionally aged, so not just in the 18 to 22-year-old age bracket. When working through all of these initial responses to a traumatic event, keeping the cultural backgrounds of the students in mind is important. Students on a campus may come from a variety of socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds, and when working with a student in a group or individually, a counselor should remind themselves that not all students will react to trauma in the same way. Students might have never been exposed to any form of trauma, or on the other hand, might have experienced trauma their entire lives. Finally, I think promoting self-care following a traumatic event on a college campus through large-scale workshops could be as helpful to as many students as possible. Relaxation techniques could be beneficial to every student, no matter the amount of stress they are experiencing following a trauma. Grounding, or bringing one's attention back to their current surroundings, could be helpful to students if they are experiencing flashbacks to the traumatic event, or if they ever find themselves becoming anxious when thinking about the event. Progressive relaxation, or the squeezing and releasing of muscle groups from head to toe, one at a time, could also be useful for students to help themselves physically relax when they become tense. Finally, mindful breathing, or focusing on taking deep breaths and counting to extend one's inhales and exhales, could be taught to students for them to use when they are feeling anxious or upset. All of these relaxation techniques could be workshopped in one setting or broken up over the course of a few meetings to help students take care of themselves while moving on from a tragedy on their campus. For the remainder of my presentation, I will cover how I think St. Bonaventure should prepare for dealing with a crisis that affects the entire SBU community. I will first go over some of the responses to emergencies that are already published in the SBU Emergency Preparedness Plan. Then I will go over the initial planning that I think would be beneficial for dealing with any type of crisis on campus. Finally, I will focus on an example crisis of a student on campus passing away, and how I think Bonna should react to it. In the SBU Emergency Preparedness Plan, last updated in 2012, there is mention of the director of the Center for Student Wellness helping out with medical responses during an emergency, and then providing, quote, emergency and recovery counseling services. In addition, the Executive Director of Residential Living and Conduct is also charged with, quote, training all residence directors and resident assistants to serve as guides and mentors for the student body in the event of an emergency. I was surprised in my review of the checklist of how to respond to a crisis on SBU's campus that the only mention of counseling services was that a special committee would be formed following the incident to determine what kind and if counseling was necessary. Obviously, every traumatic event is different, but I found it odd that there is not a predetermined and published outline of how counseling will be given to students following a crisis. In response to this, I have come up with some ideas of ways I think SBU can more specifically pre-plan triaging mental health care of its students following a crisis on campus. In order to develop and follow through with a treatment curriculum, the appropriate staff members at St. Bonaventure must do some planning first. This would include identifying what sources of help are available on campus and off, and knowing the possible limitations of each one. Having a Center for Student Wellness on campus is helpful, as there is already a group of trained professionals who can help triage the emotional needs of the students and staff on campus. The limitation of the center, however, is the number. With only a few counselors available, it would be difficult for the counselors alone to meet with every student or staff member that needs help following a crisis on campus. This issue, however, could be diminished if other staff on campus that could help were identified and trained to respond to stress. I think a possible option for additional help could be the use of the resident assistants and the resident directors. While these student staff members are already included in the emergency preparedness plan as a way to disseminate information to their floors or building, there is no mention of how they could aid in the counseling process following a traumatic event. Although they are often students themselves, these student staff members have easy access to groups of students, and in conjunction with staff from the Center for Student Wellness, RAs and/or RDs could host floor or building meetings with a trained counselor to facilitate conversations about the traumatic event. This would allow the counselors on campus to reach students early on and would help the RAs and RDs identify which students they might need to keep an eye on moving forward. Because Bonus is a Catholic school, I think it would be appropriate to include the use of spiritual advisors on campus and off in response to a crisis. Whether it be a non-denominational prayer service or simply the availability of spiritual advisors being made known, faith and spirituality may be something that is beneficial to students following a trauma. According to Wardell et al.'s 2014 study, The Unique Role of Spirituality in the Process of Growth Following Stress and Trauma, some blame God following a traumatic event they have experienced. However, some who have a higher faith maturity, or those who possess and display characteristics in line with a faith system, may turn to their faith following a tragedy. This turn towards faith, in combination with social support, can lend to those who have experienced trauma to find more positivity surrounding the traumatic event as they move on in their lives. With this research in mind, it may be beneficial in crisis response to have spiritual aid available to students who wish to use it. In the local area, there are a few resources that I think could be helpful in both triaging early care of students both on and off campus. Two in particular that I think could be helpful to students is the Cattaraugus County Community Services Office and the Catholic Charities Office, both located in Olean. Both offices are only a couple minutes drive from SBU's main campus and could offer individual and group counseling services to students. Part of these early planning meetings for crisis response on campus could also be the gathering of psychoeducational materials. Having materials ready before a crisis that pertain to specific traumatic events could be helpful in early stages of treatment in order to educate students on what they might experience or feel following a traumatic event. These handouts could also include contact information for sources of help off campus if a student feels more comfortable using these resources. The following are the steps that I think SBU could follow in response to a student's death on campus. Similar to what is already present in the SBU Emergency Preparedness Plan, I think it would be best to disseminate as much information as possible about the circumstances of the student's death as quickly as possible, while maintaining the privacy of the student and ensuring that the sharing of information does not do further harm to the campus community. This open sharing of information through the E2 campus notification system, a text and email alert that students can sign up for free, a special notice board, and RA and/or RD and counselor building meetings could all ensure that students get the right information and that no rumors are spread. These forms of communication could also offer advice on how students can stay safe, if the student's death was a result of drinking, for instance. These sources can also inform students on how they can get help from a counselor both on campus and off. This all could be part of ensuring safety of students moving forward, or psychological first aid, which entails reducing the victim's stress and connecting them with resources for help. When it comes to offering counseling, I think it would be best for the Center for Student Wellness to extend its open hours if staffing allowed it, in order to make sure that students had as much access to help as they needed. Given SBU's small size, I think it would be easy enough to start the counseling and healing process through group counseling. Whether it is through university ministries in the form of a non-denominational prayer service, building meetings, or meetings with classes, I think the counselors on campus could offer the quickest amount of help and foster social support through group counseling. These meetings could first include a group form of a structured interview to determine what symptoms students are experiencing following the trauma of losing a fellow student and friend. Skill building would also be helpful in these group settings. As outlined in the Skills for Psychological Recovery, developed by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and the National Center for PTSD, teaching young adults how to use self-care techniques and to use others as sources of support can be helpful in long-term recovery from trauma. Keeping these group meetings focused on moving forward from the trauma, while also acknowledging the student's stress from the loss of a fellow student, could help the students to realize that life will go on, and that they can help themselves feel better. Offering group counseling in these settings could also allow counselors and other staff members to identify which students may need more intensive help moving forward. If a student in a group counseling setting seems overly distraught throughout the process, for instance, a counselor or other trained staff member could pull the student aside after and offer or refer to them to meet with a counselor one-on-one. In these one-on-one meetings, the counselor should use the assessments like the Trauma Symptom Inventory 2 created by Briere in 2011, which could allow the counselor to determine what symptoms the student is individually experiencing. From there, the counselor could build a treatment plan on how to address and eliminate these symptoms, and how the student can take advantage of taking care of themselves moving forward. Overall, in both group and individual settings, instilling hope is the key to students succeeding in their treatment. Assuring students that they will be able to move forward and offering them ways to learn how to do so could teach the students how to find a way out of their despair following a trauma. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation covering the traumatic events that I think can affect college campuses, both for students on an individual basis and campus-wide, how I think campuses should respond to these incidents, and specifically how I think St. Bonaventure could start to implement a few more steps when it comes to responding to disasters or traumatic events that occur on our campus specifically. The following are my sources that were used throughout my presentation. Thank you.